Okay, last part for this reading. All right, so the Assembly of Notables was dismissed, and now we have the king again dealing directly with Parlement. And we know that Parlement, if it's controlled by the nobility, is just going to keep blocking tax increases. So everything that the king tries to decree is going to be disapproved of by the Parlement. Okay. Also, um, you're going to see that the Parlement is really trying to share power, or trying to get the king to share power with the second estate. All right. And so what they're doing is they're trying to say, look, there are some fundamental laws that not even the king can violate. All right. So there needs to be national consent to taxation. All right. And we also need to make sure that the king isn't going to arbitrarily arrest and imprison us. Does this sound familiar? Think about England about a century earlier. They're dealing with the same tension between the monarch and, in this case, the parliament, right? So the only difference is we're dealing with the judicial body against the king in France, and then it's a more legislative body against the king in England, right? But same kind of things. They're saying, look, if you really want to tax us, you have to give us more political authority, all right? So the king is going to attempt to exile all the members of parliament, but this time he's not going to be able to. All right. He previously did, or not Louis the 16th, but remember Louis the 15th did dismiss parliament, and then brought in that new and docile parliament. But this time, when he tries to exile all the judges of parliament, there's a massive protest in the throughout the country. Um, and they say, look, if you're going to dismiss us, then we're not going to loan you any more money. Remember how much debt France is in. They need to continue to borrow money from the nobility and from the wealthy merchants. So basically, it's this financial predicament that France is in that's going to make Louis the 16th give in and do what the Assembly of Notables wanted, which was to summon the Estates General. Okay, so the Estates General. They meet in May of 1789. And remember that this is an assembly. It represents all three of the estates. So they're basically the first estate elects members to represent them. Second estate, same thing. Third estate, same thing. Okay, but the third estate or the estates general had not met since 1614. So when it meets, there's a lot of confusion about how exactly it should be run. Now, it's important to realize that even if they're not quite sure how the sorry, I keep saying the third estate, how the estates general runs, the majority of the French population is really excited when the king agrees to summon the estates general, because this kind of means that there is going to be a little bit more representation by the people, instead of just an absolute authority by the king. So everybody's excited. And one of the first things the that the estates general does is it compiles a list of grievances and suggestions for the king. So basically, they're supposed to write down all the things that they don't like about the current government situation. And this is telling because you see, even though the three estates are very different, they do have some common sentiments about the government. All right, so here are the things that they agree about. They say France should have a constitutional monarchy. Okay, not an absolute monarchy. There should be some representation by the people to kind of check the power of the king. All three estates say that this is a good idea. They also say that individual liberties should be guaranteed by law. That kind of sounds familiar. Doesn't that kind of sound like what just happened in the United States? Doesn't it also kind of sound like what happened in England about a century earlier? The same kind of stuff is happening. The Enlightenment is gradually influencing all of these different countries so that they're not ruled by this absolute power anymore. Instead, the people need to share power with the monarch so that the government is not too tyrannical. All right? Also, they want to improve the situation of the parish clergy. All right, you might say, well, I thought that the clergy made up the first estate and they were doing just fine. the third estate in total was doing fine, but they realized that the average parish clergy member was quite poor. And there are many people in France that are still religious, and they don't like the fact that there are these kind of lowly parish clergy members that are, you know, in a lot of ways just as impoverished as some of the members of the third estate. Okay, so they say improve that. Also, there are internal trade barriers that especially the merchants and businessmen want to get rid of. Remember that they are in favor of a laissez-faire economic system. So they say, look, the other thing that, and all three estates agree to this, get rid of internal trade barriers, get rid of tariffs, right? Allow the government to kind of get out of this whole regulation of the economy. It should the economy should be able to increase individual wealth instead. So it's interesting to note that the three estates do agree on some major issues. Now, what do they disagree upon? The major disagreement is voting, all right? So remember that every estate elects its own representatives. So you have representatives from all three estates in the Estates General. All right, and also, of course, you have to realize that the third estate is far larger than the first and second estates. Remember, the third estate makes up about 96% of the population. And so Louis XVI tries to kind of appease this discrepancy by doubling the number of representatives in the third estate. He says, look, you know, I realize that the third estate is bigger, so hey, let's put more representatives in the third estate. All right. So you have a lot of well-educated and prosperous members of the middle class representing the third estate in the Estates General. And there were no delegates from the kind of peasantry part of the third estate. All right, so, you know, to a certain extent, you're going to see that the third estate may, even though it's bigger, it may not necessarily completely represent the entire population of the third estate. And the voting issue, okay, the way traditionally the Estates General voted was each estate got one vote, okay? First estate gets one vote, second estate gets one vote, and third estate gets one vote. So here's where we see that Louis doubling the size of the representatives in the third estate really didn't mean anything if the third estate still only had one vote. So, and this also is decided by the Parlement of Paris. All right, so this is this Parlement of Paris and voting bullet point. Right, they say, look, we need to still vote in the traditional way. Each estate gets one vote. So what's going to happen there? What if the question is, should we tax the nobility? If all three estates decide to vote on that, what do you think they're going to decide? Well, clearly the second estate is going to say, no, we don't want to be taxed. The first estate may very well also vote against it, partly because maybe they fear that they are next. The first estate certainly doesn't want to be taxed. Okay, so that leaves us to the third estate most likely voting in favor of a tax increase from the nobility, but guess what? Two obviously outnumbers one. So if each estate only gets one vote, you're going to see perpetually that the first and second estates are going to outvote the third estate. All right, so it doesn't matter that the third estate is bigger. So we need to, we're going to see that people are going to start to complain about this. And one of the major people that complains is a parish clergy member named, he was an abbot in French, that's abbé, Sieyès, all right? And he writes this pamphlet that's called What is the Third Estate? All right? He says that the third estate is everything to French society. But the second question is, what has the third estate really done up until this point in terms of government? It's done nothing. What does the third estate want to be? It wants to be something. All right, so basically the third estate wants to have some representation in government because it is everything to French society. And it has been nothing up until this point. And now that we see that the third estate is really not this kind of homogenous group of people, but yet a group that has a lot of wealth and that's giving money to the government, they want to have some representation in government. All right? So this kind of shows us that there are ideas of the Enlightenment that are actually kind of being incorporated into the ideas of the third estate. This most represents the ideas of Rousseau's social contract. Remember, he said that the general will should have power. Well, the general will is represented by all the people, and that includes the third estate, and the third estate is the biggest part of the population. Right? Another issue that we should consider is that the election of the elections of the Estates General members is taking place during the worst depression in 18th century France. We're seeing grain shortages, poor harvests, inflated bread prices, and so the third estate is going to be really frustrated. All right. Um, so when the Estates General meets, when they elect all the representatives, the third estate is really frustrated. It's frustrated that the Parlement of Paris is saying everybody gets one vote. It's also frustrated by its economic problems with this kind of depression, poor harvests, and so on. All right. So when each estate is ordered to meet and vote separately, the third estate is going to say, no, we're not going to do that. All right. We want to vote. We want all the members of the third estate to vote together. This is going to give the third estate more of an opportunity to actually get some of its items accomplished because there are more representatives of the third estate in the Estates General. So when the third estate says, no, we're not going to vote, we have a 6-week deadlock. Okay, so the third estate is going to kind of refuse to vote. You're going to see that some parish priests are going to actually defect from the first estate and join the third estate. This is going to kind of increase the third estate's ability to kind of refuse to vote. And what's going to happen is that the third estate is actually going to break away from the Estates General completely, and they are going to declare themselves the National Assembly. So this is really where the French Revolution starts, okay, where this group of people completely breaks away from the previously established government. All right, and so the National Assembly is primarily made up of members of the third estate, but they invite members of the first and second estate to join them. All right, and they want to meet, but Louis the 16th actually locks them out of their meeting place. So what do? They meet on a tennis court instead, right? And when they meet on this tennis court, they issue something called the tennis court oath. Very, very important. The tennis court oath was this decision that the third estate members made that said we will not disband until we give France a constitution. So basically, it shows that the National Assembly is not going anywhere, and that they are going to come to a major. They're going to make a major accomplishment, and that is to write down a constitution that checks the power of the king. All right. You're also going to see that there are going to be a number of aristocrats and also members of the first estate. They're going to kind of break off and join the National Assembly. And so the third estate is kind of going to assume sovereign power over the nation. And that's really going to challenge the king's sovereignty. So what's Louis going to do? He's going to summon an army, 18,000 troops. He brings them to Versailles, just in case this third estate is more than he can handle. All right, and also he's doing this because he wants to reassert his authority and divine right, right? So you're going to see that because there are these members of the first and second estate that are defecting, right? They are kind of they're deserting the Estates General and favoring the National Assembly. Louis the 16th is going to feel like he has no choice but to recognize the National Assembly. So the Estates General is going to dissolve, and now it's going to be the National Assembly. Remember, again, dominated by the third estate. All right. So the National Assembly is, again, it's dominated by the bourgeoisie. There are some members of the first and second estate that join the National Assembly, but there are some that do not. Okay, and so what's important to realize is that the revolution is kind of at this point of no return because the king makes a decision when he summons these troops to Versailles against the National Assembly that he's more sympathetic with the nobles than he is with the third estate. And so this kind of represents the idea that the French Revolution is going to continue. And we're going to see that maybe Louis kind of made a significant mistake by summoning this army. So this is all for the reading for Monday. So we'll have some more videos for Tuesday's reading.